Boys and Education, Part 2. Feminism Defrauds America. Part 1 of the series showed us how the feminists had eliminated traditional sex roles or sex differences from any discussions or textbooks in schools, and were actively seeking to socialize boys into being more like girls. Their goal was the removal of sex roles and even the removal of gender, total androgyny. This was, of course, a futile effort due to boys' different bodies, different hormones, different brains, but this, of course, didn't stop the feminists from trying to cram our boys into a female box. Have a look at this chart and note that in 1970, boys graduated from college more often than girls. This was portrayed as sexism, though it was actually a remnant of traditional sex roles. Also note that about 1981, the two are about equal. Hooray! Mission accomplished, right? Wrong. Watch as the number of girls going to college goes higher and higher. But wait, the girls now have an advantage very similar to what the boys had in 1970. But now it isn't called sexism, it's called empowerment. Now have a look at this version of the chart, which shows the way things might have unfolded if feminism was really about equality. Once boys and girls had about the same college status, they'd work to keep it about equal, right? Wrong. Feminists were not seeking equality. They were and are seeking female advantage and male diminishment. This chart gives us an idea of things that might have been if feminism was really about equality. Now go back to the original and look closely at the 1990 to 1994 period. What do you see? Girls are clearly ahead, right? Now we can ease up and think about the boys a bit. Wrong. Look at just about all the other data about how girls and boys are doing in schools, and it clearly shows that it's the boys who are in need. Boys' grades, their deportment, their dropouts, their graduations, just about everything but their SAT scores clearly show that they're in trouble. Another standardized test, the NAED, what some call the Nation's Report Card, has shown for many years that boys do a bit better in math, but face a more significant gap in reading and an even steeper gap in writing. Enter feminists. Keep in mind that nearly all the indicators, including the NAED, showed boys to be in need, but that doesn't stop the feminists. No, sir. In 1990, folks like Carol Gilligan were writing about how girls were facing bias and were undervalued. Gilligan was one of the many feminists who were claiming that girls had a severe drop in self-esteem as they entered high school. There were many claims, but very little research to back it up. Gilligan and her cronies passed on their mysterious self-esteem ideas to the media, who were more than happy to shout the nuttiest of feminist memes. Here's an example from the New York Times, January of 1991. Little girls lose their self-esteem on way to adolescence, study finds. Oh boy. This article shows us some of the standard ploys used by feminists and their media allies. Check out the way it starts. We'll read it. Girls emerge from adolescence with a poor self-image, relatively low expectations from life, and much less confidence in themselves and their abilities than boys, a study to be made public today has concluded. Confirming earlier studies that were smaller and more anecdotal, this survey of 3,000 children found that at the age of 9, a majority of girls were confident, assertive, and felt positive about themselves, but by the time they reached high school, fewer than a third felt that way. By the time they reached high school, fewer than a third felt that way. I want you to keep that claim in mind. Now, first notice that the Times calls this a study. This was not a study, it was a survey, basically a poll. The Times tries to increase the survey's credibility and make it as if it's a peer-reviewed journal study. Oops. If you were to read the entire article, you'd see that this New York Times writer is literally using the talking points given to her by feminists. The media and feminists are on the same team. There's simply no counterpoint. There's nothing heard from anyone who might disagree with the feminist perspective. It's all a dog and pony show. Remember how it starts? A study to be made public today concluded. So the article was written before the survey was even made public. This shows how they planned this together, worked together, harmonized on the major points, even before the survey was published. What you don't see is any experts who might disagree with this feminist drumbeat, and there were quite a few experts who thought the self-esteem drop in females was a bunch of bull. The claim that girls somehow lose their self-esteem before or during high school was not considered to be the case by the experts of the 1990s. One of those experts was Joseph Adelson, author of the Handbook on Adolescent Psychology. He said, "When I saw that report, I thought it was awful. I could prove it was awful, but it just wasn't worth my time." Or there's Wendy Wood, a Texas A&M professor who studied women's feelings of well-being. Wood felt that there were numerous other explanations about women's and girls' feelings and was simply not convinced of any precipitous drop in self-esteem. The standard belief from the experts at the time was summarized by Ann Peterson, a University of Minnesota psychologist who said that the majority of adolescents negotiate this developmental period without any major psychological or emotional disorders. Okay. So feminists were fighting the psychological community with their claims of bias and dropping self-esteem for girls, and of course, that didn't slow them down. They had the media and gynocentrism on their side, and these two forces were more than enough to convince the general public and eventually our ignorant and lazy legislators. So the feminists are softening the target with a barrage of articles and workshops and books on how girls are facing bias and disadvantage. Then in marches the AAUW, the American Association of University Women. Oh boy, buckle your seatbelts. This is where it gets even worse. Girls are doing better in schools. They're taking more AP courses, more often on the honor rolls, more often in honor societies, more extracurricular activities, and on, and most think they're doing okay by high school. But in comes the AAUW, who do a survey on girls' self-esteem. Then they declare a crisis. "Girls are shortchanged. America is shortchanged," became the slogan. Catchy phrase, right? This is actually following Christina Hoff Sommers' prescription for feminist land grabs. Do a bogus study, declare a crisis, get everyone worked up, especially the legislators, and then suggest a bill with lots of funding. And that's just what they did. So how did the AAUW do this? Well, it's pretty simple. They conducted a survey that cost them $100,000 and then proceeded to spend $150,000 on publicizing it with hundreds of workshops, a flood of media articles, brochures, even a documentary. What ideas did they push? Well, of course, dearie, they pushed the idea that girls have a calamitous fall in self-esteem due at least in part to the bias in schools, and their survey proves just that. Here's their chart that shows this drop. I'm happy the way I am. Just look at the chart and you can see that 60% of girls are happy the way I am in elementary school, but in high school they dropped to 29%. How about that? They proved it. Girls have a big drop in self-esteem. But they went farther. As you know, feminists have a nasty habit of using numbers to try and push their shaky agenda. 1 in 5, 1 in 3, and on and on. This time, the magic number was 17. Yes, 17. See, the girls going from 60% to 29%, right? And the boys go from 67% to 46%. So see, boys have more self-esteem in high school. Their number is 17 points above the girls. 17! Poor girls! They used this chart's difference to push this nutty idea and claimed girls had it so bad. They pushed the idea that this self-esteem drop was related to girls being treated poorly, undervalued, ignored, etc. But when you look at the survey they did, you see some significant flaws, including its reliability, and many claiming that self-esteem is not really accurately measured in such a simple survey. All good points, but they missed the mark of what the devious feminist actually did. Christina Hoff Sommers, after a great deal of trouble and resistance, got the raw data for the survey. And just what did she find? Well, she was shocked to see that the question used by the AAUW to show this big drop in self-esteem was only a small part of what had been asked. It seems that the actual survey question was, I'm happy the way I am. And then they offered 5 different possible responses. A, always true. B, sort of true. C, sometimes true, sometimes false. D, sort of false. And E, always false. What did the feminists do? They only used the number of times boys and girls chose A, always true and ignored the other 4 possible responses. Cherry picking isn't a strong enough word to describe this deception. So when you look at their chart, all you're seeing is 1/5 of the actual responses. Only the percentage who chose A, always true. So in high school, girls chose always true 29% of the time. Pretty deceptive, right? Think back to their claim. What was it? It was this: confirming earlier studies that were smaller and more anecdotal. This survey of 3,000 children found that at the age of 9, a majority of girls were confident, assertive, and felt positive about themselves, but by the time they reached high school, fewer than a third felt that way. Can you see the overt dishonesty? Looking at the 5 possible responses, one would think that self-esteem would be okay if you answered A, B, or C, right? Sort of true, or even sometimes true, would show someone who wasn't in dire straits, right? Most folks and most professionals would likely only be worried if someone chose D or E. So, what do you think were the scores for the girls for A plus B plus C? Well, the high school girls answered this: A is 29%, B 34%, and C 25%. So if you total those 3, you get 88%. That's nearly all girls checked one of the first 3 boxes. So the vast majority of girls didn't have self-esteem problems. The feminist hid the other data and showed only 1/5 of the answers, the 5th that falsely proved their narrative. Sheesh. And how about the boys? How did they score? Well, 92% of the boys checked A, B, or C, just 4% more than the girls. The AAUW's big deal of 17 points gets crushed by their own data. This is devious, deceitful, and crooked. But that was far from the only deceitful maneuver they took. Another example of their deception was outed when Summers found that when you looked at their survey numbers by race, you were forced to come to some very different conclusions. It seems that Asians tended to score low on the self-esteem questions, but were very high in their school achievements. Just the opposite of what you'd expect from the intentionally misleading feminist take on this. And blacks scored higher on self-esteem questions, but had considerably lower achievements at schools. Since girls also scored lower on the self-esteem questions and were doing better in school, it seems that an easy case could be made for an inverse relationship between what they're calling self-esteem and the resulting school achievement. The worse you do on the self-esteem part, the better your grades. Of course, the feminists didn't advertise their own data that proved them to be deceitful. And then the AAUW did yet another survey, this one trying to connect the dots between the self-esteem ruse and girls being disadvantaged at school. The title was, How Schools Shortchange Girls. This survey was even more popular than the first. This one sparked 1,400 media articles nationwide on the feminist talking points. Here's a sample of those points. For too long, the needs of girls have been ignored or overlooked in crafting education policy. Teachers ignore female students. Dreadful waste of female talent. Girls were taught to feel that women were undervalued. Bias against girls is found rife in schools. At age 11, girls suddenly begin doubting their worth and no longer like themselves and begin to question their own abilities. It's tragic to think of the loss of potential. Girls are being shortchanged, and America is being shortchanged. And they took their survey and these talking points to Capitol Hill, and of course there was no counterpoint. The AAUW had a bill all ready for legislators. It called for $360 million to help fix this self-esteem problem that manifests in the degradation of girls in schools and leaves girls facing serious inequities. 50 legislators were co-sponsors. Everyone applauded this wonderful bill, and what happened? Well, in short order, the legislators started voicing the same talking points the media had been pushing for some time. Senator Kennedy stated this bill refutes the common assumption that boys and girls are treated equally in our education system. Clearly, they are not. Now, where did he get that idea? With even a little bit of study, he would have seen that this was all smoke and mirrors. But no, he knew better than to cross the feminist oligarchy. Another cheerleader was Gloria Steinem, who claimed that self-esteem issues translated to depression, teen pregnancy, and eating disorders. No data to back this up, just made the claim. Representative Patricia Schroeder, one of the pro-girl legislators at the time, was quoted to have said, "Teachers are more likely to call on boys. Girls who call out are reprimanded and told to raise their hands." Now where did Schroeder get this idea? She got it from the feminist talking points and simply echoed the claim in full confidence that it was correct. But Summers found the original research that was referred to by the AAUW literature about this statement. What did it say? The original research had been about how boys and girls are reprimanded differently and how boys are disciplined more than girls. The finding of the study stated that boys get 8 to 10 times the number of reprimands as girls. Somehow that got twisted into teachers are more likely to call on boys. This is devious, deceitful, and crooked. Sadly, Summers outed them long after the bill had passed and the hundreds of millions of dollars had been embezzled. Let's just take a second to look at this bill. Look under findings. It says, gender bias is widespread in educational programs and processes in the United States, and most such inequities have a disproportionately negative impact on women and girls. Oh boy, where did they get this idea? They didn't get it from the multitude of experts outside the feminist oligarchy. Our lazy pants legislators just smiled and sent millions of dollars to a radical ideological group that had lied repeatedly. But the legislators got plenty of brownie points and votes for supporting this craziness. And if this only happened once, then I wouldn't be so concerned. But really, this has happened over and over again. Feminists have used the exact same slimy tactics in a multitude of crusades for more stuff for women. Each of these starts with the idea that women are second-class citizens and includes something negative about men as the problem. Think of the different areas: healthcare, education, domestic violence, sexual harassment, anti-fatherhood, divorce, sexual assault, workplace inequality, wage gap, rape, and more. Take just a moment to consider the scale of what we're seeing. We're talking about billions and billions of dollars fraudulently sent to dishonest radicals who are interested in all things for girls and women, and to hell with the men and boys. This is likely the biggest one-sided fraud ever pushed on our country. It's time we put a stop to this. Tell your family, tell your friends, tell your community, and most of all, tell your legislators that feminism has defrauded our country, and this needs to stop. We need to embrace humanitarianism, which has compassion for all, not just for a subset. My thanks to Christina Hoff Sommers and her book, Who Stole Feminism, which has provided much of the information for this video. Also, if you want to read an excellent book on these various corrupt feminist cons, you might want to have a look at The Feminist Crusades, Making Myths and Building Bureaucracies by Frank Zeppazauer. It'll give you the details of each crusade and the multitude of feminist dirty tricks and deceptions. He also gives you a view into where they got their funding and who supported such misandry. It's a fascinating and infuriating read. The author, Frank Zeppazauer, died last year. I was fortunate to have had the pleasure of communicating with him via email and thanking him for his excellent work. Bless your heart, Frank. Our next part 3 is going to look at the research about how boys and girls are treated differently in schools, and hold on to your hats for that one. And don't forget, men are good, as are you. Come see me on Patreon. We're going to start a new private forum up there where people can talk, and we'd love to have you be a part. So we'll see you.